This session is about API basics and Cucumber basics. Basics that are enough for API karate automation. So it is not going to be in detail coverage of the concepts, but the concepts that are required for karate automation are being discussed. Firstly, getting into any technology or any area, the basic thing that a tester should know is the vocabulary that is used. For example, a manual tester, before getting into the manual testing, he should know the testing vocabulary, like what is a test case, what is a test scenario, what is sanity test, what is smoke test, what is a defect, and so on. In similar lines, coming to API testing also has a vocabulary, a group of terms, a basic terms that are used in API testing. So here is a list of basic terms. I'll try to cover each one. Let me open Postman. So before getting into automation of APIs, it is mandatory that one should know what is an API, how it works. So it is similar to any automation, like if you try to automate any functional UI scenarios, a tester should know what the functionality is, and he should gather all the details that are required to start with the automation, be it with test data, test environment, or etc. Similarly, for API testing, what is an API, what is an endpoint, and what are the tools that we use to test the API. So to test manually the APIs and to automate to some extent, there are some tools that are used, and the one which is widely used is Postman. So this is how the Postman will look like. You can download it on internet and you can install it. It is pretty simple. You can create a collection. Collection is nothing but a group of APIs that you wanna group together based on any criteria. You can add a request in any API request, you would say, and you can start working with that. I have created one collection already, so I'll delete this. This is the collection that will be used for this entire series to automate, to play around with the APIs. So as I mentioned, to before starting the automation, let us understand what these APIs are and what this functionality is about. So starting with one get API, coming to the vocabulary, endpoint URL, the basic and the first thing that an API looks for is the endpoint URL. An endpoint URL is the address of the server on which the APIs are deployed. In order to test the APIs, you need to give that endpoint URL and send the request. So the request will go to that particular server and the server will send us back the response. So endpoint URL is a basic and the first thing that is needed for any API. So the endpoint itself have few other components in it. We'll discuss in next few minutes about that. So this is the HTTP method, and this is a section for parameters, query parameters. This is a section for authorization. Few APIs may need authorization as per the design, and if there are any headers, you can provide it here. Headers are something which goes in a pair, like a key and a value. You should specify the key and a value here, and the request body. So this is called request body or request payload or simply body. Generally, post request will have a body. Get in general do not have any body. So let us see how an API functions. So assume this is the application that you are using which uses these APIs. Either it can be a mobile or a laptop. So that is called a client. So client is the place from where you are trying to hit the web APIs. So then that will go to an area where the APIs are deployed. We call it as a host server. Either it could be a physical server or a cloud. A cloud is also basically a group of machines which are deployed in one area and can be shared among multiple resources. And that API again hit and reach to the application server. Application server is an area where the application is deployed. So these APIs will reach to that application server, and based on the design of that API and based on the processes that are developed for that API will handle all the stuff. And again internally, if a connection to database is needed, again a database connection happens and data is retrieved from the database, and again all the calculations are happened based on the process, like whatever it could be, and the response is sent back to the host server. From the host server again the response comes back to the application, the client. To understand, let me put a simple example. When you are trying to create a new account on any e-commerce portal, for example Amazon, when you try to create a new account, it asks for the basic details like username and password and your email ID. So after providing those details on the page, when you click on create account, right, internally in the backend an API call is made to the host server. Okay, so based on the details that are provided and based on the authentication that is provided, the host server talks to the application server. Okay, and it will do some process there based on the code that was written, and it will try to create a new record on the database. It will create a new account for you in the database. So after the record is created successfully, it will send an intimation to the application server that the record is created successfully. Application server is a server on which the API is looking for a response, right? So once the application server receives the response, the API will pick that response and will send back to the client. A client is nothing but your desktop or a phone from where you created an account. So this is how it happens in general. So the endpoint URL we just spoke about on the Postman, it internally have few more components. One is the HTTPS, the protocol we call it, hypertext transfer protocol. So protocol is nothing but set of rules that are designed and been followed when you try to develop an API. So there are multiple protocols: HTTPS, HTTP, FTP, etc. And the next comes the domain part. You see the one that is highlighted is called the domain. So a domain or a host server address or base URL or simply the URL. So all these are same. It is basically the address of the host server, the server on which the APIs are deployed. So once you reach the server, there is something called resource. So resource is basically on the host server, there will be multiple resources that are deployed. So which part of that resource you want to trigger, either get the data or you wanna create a new data or modify the data. So on which resource you want to do an operation, you need to specify that. That path is called resource path. So after you specify the resource path, you see a question mark. So anything that comes after the question mark is basically used to filter the results that are retrieved. So on a resource, you are trying to do some operation and get back some results. And the results you want to filter it. You don't want to see the entire results. You want to filter the results. So after the question mark, you give query parameters. Query parameter is used to query the results that are brought by the API. So this is generally used with get HTTP method. So get method will get the results from the server. If you want to query the results and filter the results, you will use the query parameters. So this is the endpoint URL which comprises of multiple components. I'll repeat it again. The first one is the protocol, which protocol the API is using. So all these details you should be getting it from the API design document. So API design document, much before you start the actual testing of the APIs, you need to get that design document either from the solution architect or development team. The document generally will be in a MS Word document format, or could be on a Confluence page or a wiki page, or could be Swagger as well. Swagger is again a link you can use, and you can get the details of the APIs. Let me show one example of the Swagger as well. So this is how the Swagger will look like. So the Swagger will list down all the APIs that are present and needs to be tested and automated. So firstly you should pick one API, for example like this, and if you see here, these are the servers that are available. So this is the domain name or the host server or the URL we just spoke about, we just talked about, right? So I'll use this thing to copy it. It's the same thing here. And I'll come to Postman. I'll create a request. I'll paste it here, and I see this is the get operation that is gonna be performed on this particular resource. So this is the resource path. So I specify the resource path and I select the HTTP method. Okay, and you see that here it is mentioned as query. Query means query parameter. Okay, so these two are the query parameters that you want to do. And there is something called a schema as well for a post request. Yeah. See something here, it is coming in the response that email is of type string, right? So similarly for the payload also you will have one request payload also you will have a schema. So I think it should have some schema here. Let me check. Yeah, here it is, right? So based on this schema you can design the request, and based on the schema you can validate your response. That response will contain some elements. So response will be in the form in a JSON format. Request also can also be in JSON format or XML format or simply string, or could be some other XYZ format. Those details will be discussed as and when we reach that stage of complexity. But to keep it simple, Swagger is one place where you can find the API design. So API design is used to build your request on Postman and test them manually. So that's all for now. You can figure it out like on this document, on this Swagger, what needs to be entered, what is the endpoint, what is the query parameter, what is the path parameter, what is the resource path, and what is the HTTP method, either get or post or put. Okay, so HTTP methods, as we were talking about HTTP methods, let us talk something in detail about what each HTTP method is used. So HTTP method shows us what operation is being performed on that particular resource path on the host server. So HTTP is a protocol that allows the communication between clients and servers. Client is the place where you are triggering the request. Server is the place where actual APIs are being hosted, deployed, and running. So get request. So on a particular resource, um, for example, the same example, let us take the same example of Amazon. So there is an account resource account. Okay, so you want to hit that resource and get all the accounts that are present on the Amazon. So Amazon will not allow, definitely it will have a lot of security and it won't allow you to get the results, but in general let us take it as an example. So you do a get operation on the resource account. So in the response what you will get is basically the list of accounts that are present on the Amazon. Okay, so get is only a read operation. You are not going to do any edit or create on the resource. You are just trying to retrieve the data, and if the data is very huge, you can query it, you can filter it using query parameters, right? Then post request. Post is actually you are trying to create a new resource. So previously you tried to create a account on Amazon. So that is a post request, because on that particular resource account you are trying to create a new record with your user details. You are trying to create a new account. So that is a post operation. And put. So you have added the account on Amazon, but you have added some incorrect data by mistake. So the next time what you will try to do is you will try to modify an account. For example, my Gmail ID, I have a typo mistake which I need to correct. So next I'll do one more request and I'll try to modify it. So if you observe carefully, when you try to edit an account, you will not be sending only one field. For example, on the registration page I have added 10 different inputs: my name, my mail, my address, my card details, and everything. But I need modification only in my Gmail ID. But still, if you try to hit a put request, you need to send the entire body, entire 10 details in your request. So you are trying to modify only one field. But if you are trying to use put request, you need to send the entire form data to modify even one field or two fields or all the fields. That is a put request. So I'll repeat it again. Put request is used to modify an existing account on a particular resource. An example, you are trying to modify one record present on a particular resource. In our example, the resource is account, and you are trying to modify the Gmail ID of your account. But still, you need to send all the 10 fields in your request payload. That is for put. Okay, why do we want to send all the 10 fields? It is as per the design. If you are doing a put request, you need to send all the 10 fields. Right. So this increases the load that is gonna put on the server. So what is the solution? Patch. So patch is another HTTP method. It also works in the similar fashion of a put, but patch will help you to reduce the load. For example, in our case, we just want to modify the mail ID. Then it is just needed to submit the request with only one field, that is Gmail ID. And in this case, you don't have to submit the rest 9 fields in your request payload. So that is the difference between put and patch. Put and patch both will update a record on the resource, but put payload will include all the fields, whereas patch can include only the fields that you want to modify. So that way you can reduce the load that is being put on a particular server. Got it? Next is delete request. So it is straightforward. You want to delete a particular record of a particular resource. For example, if I want to delete my record account, Amazon account, I just use this thing. So up to till now, these are all the most frequently used APIs. So wherever you go, these gonna come on your way, and you just need to handle them. And the rest are pretty rarely used, but still we'll try to cover them as well. Head request. So head request, generally we use to see if the server is up or not. So for a get request, you will try to get the data. Along with the data, there are some headers also that the response returns. So header, as we mentioned, it is just a key and a value pair. Header can be present in the request as well as in the response. If it is present in the request, that should be provided by the user. If it is present in the response, that data will come from the server to your client machine. And trace request. So trace request generally used for debugging purposes. So nothing much as we can interfere there actually. So connect request is something to establish the network and the client connection. So this this API generally happens in production. So in QA environment or maybe in stage, we generally don't see this because the connection will already been established. So in the production, there could be many security layers. So before testing any API, before triggering any API in the production, they want to make sure that the connection is established. If the connection is not established, then there is no point in sending the request. Correct. So in those cases, this connection connect HTTP method will be used. And options. So options, HTTP call will pull all the options that are present on a particular resource. So in our example, the account resource, Amazon account resource, when you try to hit the options HTTP method, it will provide you all the available options. For example, I can't I can't modify my payment details. So that is one time thing. So the edit operation on the account details will not be pulled, right? So when I click on options, when I try to trigger the options API for my resource Amazon account, it will return me all the options that are available. For example, get request, put request, post request. So these are all the requests that you can trigger on this particular resource. So it will give you those options in the response. So these are all like at a high level what each HTTP call will do. We'll see in general when we are trying to automate, we'll try to find out more details. Okay. Let us understand very quickly the APIs that we are going to automate, right? So get all objects. So this is my HTTP protocol. This is my domain name or URL, and this is the path, and this is the HTTP method I'm gonna do. And when I'm trying to send the request, I'll receive the response, and this is my status code. So status code again specifies what status is being sent by the server. If it is 200 okay, then the status is successful, and it's a success. Similarly, we have 3 series, 4 series, and 5 series codes as well. And post an object. So post, as I mentioned, it is used to create a new resource, a new record for a particular resource, to be precise. So objects is your resource. You are creating a new record of type object. So this is a new record that we are going to create on an object. So that is post request. So get list of objects by IDs. So as I mentioned, this particular endpoint will retrieve all the records. Could be 1000 or 2000 or 4000. But your interest is in only 2 records, either ID 3 and 5. So that way you can filter, you can cut down the results to only 2. So this is your query parameter, and you can filter the results. Similarly, put is used to modify the record as we mentioned, but still we need to send the entire payload. Patch is also updating the record, but you can just enter the field that you want to update. You don't have to send the entire payload. Delete, it's straightforward. To delete a particular record, you just need to specify the ID that you want to delete, and it will be deleted. So these APIs, just an overview of to make you understand what these APIs and how it functions. But in detail, when we try to automate a get API, we'll discuss more on the query parameters and path parameters, and what are the different ways you can automate, and what are the techniques that you can use to automate, and the verify. um, so that covers the basic things that are needed for karate API automation. I don't think so more than this it is needed, but as and when, if we find any new topic, we'll try to cover it at that time. I think we covered all the topics. Assertions, yes. So assertions are the validations. So in any test case or any test scenario, there should be an expected result. What exactly we are doing in this test case, and what is the output or the outcome that we are expecting out of it. So that in API terminology we call them assertions. Even in automation also we call them assertions. TestNG we use assertions, right? TestNG JUnit. So and similarly we use assertions for the API also. So assertions will be performed on a response. So because in the request we gather all the details and try to send it. So those are all the input conditions that we gather, and we hit the API. So once the API is hit, the server will send us back the response. So that is the area where we validate the response. So to validate a response, there are multiple assertions, multiple ways we can do it, multiple things we can assert it. We'll see in the next sessions.